Andrew, glad you could make it. I think
Yeah,
we're
my schedule opened up, so I'm so happy to be here because I've been following you folks faithfully through all of your chapters. So it's great to be here finally.
Yeah,
I feel
glad
like
you
I
could
know
join
all
us.
of you, and I don't even know you.
Yeah, the promise and the peril of these digital technologies. There's been quite a few people watching and commenting on these recordings on YouTube, and these videos will be up indefinitely, and so I'm quite sure that a year or 2 years, many years from now, people will stumble upon the playlist and go through this journey with us again, and as if it were fresh and new. So that's exciting. And before I get started and just briefly introduce this final chapter, I just want to thank you all very much for your participation and passionate participation in reading this book together. It's not just an intellectual exercise. This is a kind of fellowship, and I've felt that all the way through. And it's kind of sad to be ending today, but we're just ending this book, right? And there's much more ahead of us. So let me share my screen. I have a couple of slides. All right. Can you all see that?
yes.
Wonderful. Just get things rearranged here. So, the consequences of monism. In many ways, this chapter, and I'll also talk a bit about the appendix, is a summary, a review of the journey we've been on. But there's some very important leading thoughts, I'll call them, or hints about how this work connects to anthroposophy and spiritual science that I want to emphasize. But let's just quickly go through the main ideas here. Steiner is seeking a uniform explanation of the world, right? A monistic account. But he wants to do this only in terms of human experience, of what we can experience, whether in our thinking or in our perceiving, and including the sources of our own free action, right? So whatever the sources of free action are, Steiner says they are part of this one world. We don't need to refer to a separate moral world order, which would be somehow transcendent to the world of experience. It's all here, right? We don't need anything more than our own thinking and perceiving to understand everything that there is to be understood. Right? Monism does not seek to add to experience something non-experienceable or transcendental, but finds the full reality in concept and percept. So for Steiner, monism rejects any speculative inference that would abstract elements from experience and then project those elements to a beyond that would supposedly be the cause of experience. He says, that we may as well just stick with experience, since even when we do that kind of abstract metaphysical speculation, we're always drawing elements from experience anyway. He says, at first, we take the perceptual part of the universe as if it were something existing on its own, because we do not see the belts and ropes by which the fundamental forces of the cosmos keep the wheel of our life revolving. And here, I think he's talking about these fundamental forces. You could say this is the conceptual nexus. You could say this is thinking activity. You could say this is the logos. He's using this interesting mechanical metaphor here, but I think it still works, right? It's quite a compelling vision that he presents of this revolving wheel of life. Oops. then he says, when we observe with our thinking, we carry out a process which itself belongs to the order of real events, right? Thinking is woven into the world. There's no second world beyond the first, which we experience in our thinking and perceiving, right? As if we would need to receive our understanding of the laws of nature or of the moral law as a kind of gift ready-made from God. He says, as long as a person apprehends himself merely by means of self-perception, he sees himself as this particular individual. As soon as he looks at the world of ideas that lights up within him, embracing all that is separate, he sees within himself the absolute reality living and shining forth, right? And in this sense, every person in his thinking lays hold of the universal primordial being which pervades all, right? So God is not something out there that would provide us laws of nature or moral laws. God is that which we ourselves participate in our thinking, right? The web of concepts which links together the percepts. When we engage in the thinking activity by which these connections occur, we are participating in the primordial being, right? And this is, on the one hand, Steiner is making this divine ground of being and becoming kind of like mundane, like we're participating in that all the time and we don't even realize it, right? So he's both making, you could say he's making the divine more mundane, but he's also making the mundane, the world divine. Our ordinary thinking activity is already a participation in the spiritual world, right? So no world dictator, no mother nature can give us our aims. We must determine them with our own moral imaginations. And if we don't determine them with our own, we will be led by those of others. And then he says that the idea that realizes itself in an action, when we do this, we're detaching from the unitary world of ideas, this idea, and making it the basis of our own will, right? And what I take him to mean here is that in moral action, we are intuiting and then incarnating an idea. And in this way, we're individualizing it in moral imagination, and we're making it the basis of our own will. And so something universal is being translated into something individual, right? And so while the realm of ideas is universal, when we intuit an idea to become, through moral imagination, the motive of our action, we are individualizing that universal. And through that individualization, free actions can occur. And this is the real pivot here now into spiritual science, right? So he says, whatever comes to us by way of percept is something that on our journey through life, we simply have to await. The only question is, would it be right to expect, from the point of view that this purely intuitively experienced thinking gives us, to expect that man could perceive spiritual things as well as those perceived with the senses? So he adds, intuitively experienced thinking is an active process taking place in the human spirit, and it is a spiritual percept grasped without a physical sense organ. So as I was saying before, through intuitive thinking, we are already in contact with a spiritual reality. And from this experience of spirit in our own intuitive thinking, we can turn in a kind of metanoia we can turn about to a different kind of perception, not of the physical sense world, but of the spiritual world. And this is initially, just as when in the Republic, in Plato's image of the cave, right, of someone trapped in the cave, turning about, crawling up the cave towards the light. They're initially sort of blinded by this. They can't see clearly. They're just bedazzled by this new reality that's not just shadows on the cave wall. And the difficulty of spiritual perception is that initially it's difficult, unlike with the sense world, which we experience as separate from us. In the spiritual world, it's not separate from us anymore, right? There's this sort of intimate relation between our own activity and what we perceive. It's a participatory experience, right? And so when we're first turning around from the sensory to the spiritual world, it's difficult to distinguish what's my activity and what is something I'm perceiving. And this is where practice, different spiritual practices become necessary so that we can begin to distinguish what we are doing from what we are perceiving. And in this little graphic I drew out here, it seemed to me that there's a kind of cycle going on here, that we meet our percepts through our sensing in the physical world. Thinking links these percepts together via concepts. And then in order to achieve a free action, we through moral imaginations imbued with feeling, develop these motives, which we then translate into deeds, which then change the physical world again, right? And so there's this cycle. And while the physical eyes give us sensation of the physical world, I thought that the heart is sort of this, the spiritual heart is this organ of perception, which aids us in the cultivation and development of moral imaginations to motivate the will, right? But Steiner's monism is such that the intuitive thinking that allows us to develop moral imaginations to then affect free deeds, those free deeds are changing the physical world that we sense, right? And so there's not two worlds here. There's two ways of looking at one world. And even when we're not yet aware of what the spiritual world that awaits us when we go through this metanoia, we're always already partaking in it to the extent that we are thinking. And, Steiner's whole effort here has been to wake us up to what we're always already doing, such that we can freely engage in the spiritualization of the world. Not by fleeing from the physical world, but by seeing that the physical world is the spiritual world, the physical world rightly seen and rightly felt and perceived through this spiritual heart organ. I don't know if you can see the little heart here. That the physical world perceived through this spiritual heart organ is the physical world perceived through this the spiritual heart organ is the spiritual world, right? They're just only separated when we think that what we perceive is all that there is, when before we've awakened to this exceptional state of intuitive thinking, we imagine that the world of perception is all that there is, and so we feel cut off from it. So finally, the appendix, in the prior chapter, Steiner had been telling us that for monism, the conceptual content of the world is the same for all individuals, for all human individuals. He says, thinking leads all perceiving subjects to the same ideal unity in all multiplicity. He says the ideas of another human being are in substance mine also. So he's established that we can communicate with other individuals because we share the same world of ideas, the same conceptual nexus. But he wants to point out the challenges that come up to this idea that we can really communicate with one another. Because if you are stuck in a materialistic world picture, it becomes very difficult to understand how one mind could truly meet another mind, right? And Steiner describes the phenomenology of this in, I think, quite a moving way, that when we take in another person, initially via percepts of, say, their face as they are speaking to us, that we immediately bring our thinking to this, and the percept of the person extinguishes itself and becomes thinking, but not my thinking. If I'm actually listening, it's the other person's thinking that takes up residence in me. And my own thinking goes to sleep, as it were. But we don't notice this because the other person's thinking immediately fills our consciousness. And so real communion occurs in this way. And the tragic irony here is that, just as Steiner finishes describing beautifully how human communion is possible, he goes on to talk about how von Hartmann misunderstood Steiner's philosophy of freedom. And I just really felt the sadness and frustration in Steiner, that this person he really wanted to convince didn't get it, because he was lost in abstraction, right? Von Hartmann imagining that when two people are communicating, actually six people are there, this bizarre consequence of this very abstract way of thinking. And so I'll end there. This book, I think, is a tremendous achievement, but Steiner's sort of admitting to us at the end that there's a tragedy here because many people won't get it. And that this does take an individual effort. And as well as Steiner did trying to lead us into this experience of intuitive thinking, you can only lead the horse to the water. All right, I'll stop there. Oh, sorry, it took a little bit longer than I thought there, but hopefully that was helpful. And let's talk about it.
I'm struck this time through reading how he has placed cause as a central configuration in this monism, this reality play. Meaning, we've contemporary culture, materialism, as you were referring to, has given up the idea of cause. It's predictability and probability as a scientific endeavor all the way down. And the idea of origins of things, why they exist. You know, we're used to talking about the ought-it conundrum or divide, that you can't get an ought from an it. But it's also true that to have a real ought, you have to know what it is and how it originates to sort of stay in an abstraction. And I really feel the accomplishment in this chapter of a phenomenological argument for going to cause and never compromising that endeavor. I'd be interested to know what folks think about that.
Can I build off of what Jeff said? Sorry,
Go ahead, Matt.
I'm having trouble finding the hand raise function. So I don't know, Matt, if you wanted to add something.
No, jump in.
Well, I would like to weave together what Jeff said about causality And then what you said, Matt, with the allusion to the allegory of the cave and the turning about, the metanoia. From Plato's Republic, these two passages follow like very shortly after he presents the allegory of the cave, and I thought the imagery is quite evocative. He describes in two different places, like in short sequence, he says, just as the eye was unable to turn from darkness to light without turning the whole body, so there's turning, so too the instrument of knowledge can only by the movement of the whole soul be turned from the world of becoming into that of being. And then only shortly after that, he describes, he says, this is true philosophy, is the quote, turning of the soul from day that is a kind of night to true day. Of course, this to me harkens to the Easter morning scene in the Gospel of John, when it describes Mary's two turns when she first, it says, and when this is John 20, and when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou hast borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself, and then she recognizes Jesus, and she says, Master. Steiner is describing, this book is called The Philosophy of Freedom. He's trying to lay out a path to freedom. And, essential to that path is the observation and recognition of our own spiritual activity, our own, through the observation of thinking, we become conscious of a region in ourselves that is free. We can't, it's not possible to do that it's not possible to index intention and spiritual activity to the perceptions, even like mental pictures that we have. It's not possible to index those two things to one another, irrespective of the idea of causality. And so, like Jeff said, it's one of the most pernicious things to start to, imagine you could discard the idea of causality and still actually, attain to what's possible for a human being. It occurs to me, like when we're arguing about, monism or the spiritual world or one thing or the other, it's almost like, in some way, philosophers and scientists are always doing this, although they just often describe the way they're doing it as something else. They describe what they're doing as, almost like discovering features of the world. And there's a certain element to that, but another element to it is providing us with coherent ways of conceptualizing the world. Steiner describes the way the world just kind of appears to us as though it's shot from a gun, as this field of percepts. And it's our task actually to render those percepts coherent by finding intelligible and incoherent ways of talking about it. And I mean, to get rid of causality, it's like trying to talk about or to describe the transcendental realism or idealism, these two world systems or a world without causality. It would be like trying to describe the world as with a concept of outside but no inside or something like that. You see how difficult it is to actually see, to grasp the world in a way that that it's intelligible to you and that you can be part of it with some of these, concepts that we've inherited, or some of these, I guess, categories, even conceptual paradigms, I guess is the best word for it. Some of them that we've inherited from prior thinkers, they basically lame and cripple our ability to function. I'll leave it. I think any one of us could come up with a number of paradigms that have that effect. And I think one of the most powerful elements of Steiner's thought, especially as it's concentrated in the philosophy of freedom, is giving us a way of seeing the world that allows us to actually move forward and evolve in what is possible for us. So I'll end there, and I hope somebody can I hope what I said can be someone can carry it forward.
Thank you, Max. I do have thoughts, but I'll let them continue to mature and give Angus a chance to speak.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Max and Jeff. You said a lot of interesting stuff, Max, especially about the need for explanation. I'm going to focus on the other bits that you were talking about the turning back, reviewing things, because one of the things that struck me about this chapter was I was continually taken back to chapters 1 and 2. So the resolving that's going on here, it's got this work of art feel about it, or so, like, you know, recapitulation in a fairy tale. It's like takes you get to the end of the story and you're back at the beginning and again. And so just a few examples. I mean, he's promising us at the beginning of the book, I'm not going to give you ready-made answers. I'm going to give you a region of the soul where you can experience freedom directly. It's a place that you can go to. And I think as we arrive at the end of this chapter, we can all like sense this reality growing more intensely in us, but also feeling we want to, in a way, go back and start reading the book from the beginning again, just like to intensify the experience of when he said this, and we've already sort of like come to an initial experience of this region of the soul. But there are other elements as well which I think are particularly interesting, because also he's emphasized, as you did in your presentation, Matt, about this what freedom is for a human being. It's working out of your own moral imaginations, as opposed to being, it's like falling under the spell of, or under the bondage, possibly even, of other people's moral imaginations. And this is in my mind, this is directly connected to where he's talking in chapter 1 about Spinoza's definition of what freedom is. He defines God. He doesn't think we're gods, but here at the end of chapter 14, we're experiencing ourselves as divine beings. That's what you were saying in your summary, Matt, isn't it? The world is our creation. We live in this amazing creation, and we are creators within this world. And it's the spiritual world that feeds us with those imaginations, intuitions, and moral technique to begin to reshape the world in what we hope is a better image. And then, of course, what else does he do? He's healed this rift in the soul, that alas, two hearts beat in my breast. He's talking about Schiller and Goethe in chapter 2, and here we've got this healing. We feel united in this world. We're not. It's when he talks about Hartmann and Schopenhauer, like taking realms of experience and putting them beyond experience that we can never reach. That schism has been healed. And then, just to take one more example, in chapter 3, when we talked about the exceptional state, this realm of soul, where we come to experience this transcendental nature of thinking. Transcendental in the sense, I mean, overcoming the experience of there's a subjective world and there's an objective world. He says something along the lines of, he says, through the percept, reality is given to us objectively. The concept is given to us subjectively. But when we begin to see how through thinking these two are united, we also feel united in that process. So it's he turning us back, recapitulating. It's an intensification of this process that we've been through in this book, it's a joy to read.
Thank you, Angus. Go ahead, Jeff.
I just wanted to add a short bit there that pick up where Angus left off, where at a younger age, he spoke of thinking being neither subjective nor objective, that it creates the concepts of those. And in this chapter, he sort of fulfills that in a deeper and richer way by saying thinking embraces the perceptual experience and the conceptual experience. It doesn't negate them. It utilizes them in a harmonic together. And there's this third element that steps in and holds the two so beautifully in this and throughout the book, but really in this chapter, and places us back to this idea of cause on one side in our subjective experience at the creation of something, and on the other side, ironically enough, at the perceptual, where knowledge occurs. I mean, you can't have knowledge without the percept. It's just an empty concept, and you can't have the reverse either. Otherwise, it's just a chaotic, unpatterned world, and that's no reality at all. So I found that so beautifully matured in this 1918 edition. This is true, right? This is The Consequences was written in 1918. Is that right?
I'm not sure. Is that true? Yeah. Makes sense, because it's set apart from the rest of the book in this interesting way. But he does also have those two ending editions. At least in my copy, it says at the end of The Consequences of Monism, author's editions 1918 is written. So I didn't get the impression that the whole chapter was 1918. Does someone? I saw Andrew shaking his head yes. Does anyone know?
I might be wrong about that. It could be also that as Angus was saying, this is a complete work of art, and he's doing a sort of ritual what do you say, a ritual experience of the bearing of the fruit or something like that.
Lorenzo, what are you thinking?
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I would like to express a somewhat different opinion. I want to bring some criticism to the book, because I think that if this book hasn't been fully accepted and people were not convinced by it, it's also because it is incomplete, in my opinion. And this doesn't mean that it doesn't lay a good basis, but I think that the argument lacks a part, the exploration of a certain problem, and that problem brings with it the whole of anthroposophy. And so Steiner went on to explain what is missing in the book, but the book is compiled as if it brought a complete argument, while I think there is a big hole, and this hole is that we have a phenomenological, let's say, a phenomenologically proof kind of realism, but we have no explanation, no theory of what is a body. And I mean body in the broadest sense, not just the physical body, but then everything that constitutes a whole, an organism that holds together. Since we are not in a reductionist point of view, we should have a theory for what makes a whole, without being just the simplest pieces, but something that can be an aggregate but still constitute a whole. And I think this is a body. And in anthroposophy, Steiner went on exploring the problem, and together with the idea of how to create a theory, a participatory theory of body, and from the theory of body, a theory of object, and also that objects as specific kinds of bodies, brings with it the idea of the four worlds, of the stages, and also the reversal of usual Darwinian evolution. And all of this is implied, and sometimes it has surfaced during our discussions, but it is never really dealt with here, and so one is left with a problem that, of course, as I said, Steiner went on exploring. And here I think it's very relevant, the thought, for example, of Wilhelm Reich, because what Reich did, the most important thing that Reich did, in my opinion, is to demonstrate how the division between an inside and an outside, a skin, something that, as I said, can define a whole, even if it is not completely simple, goes always together with perception. And so we could, and perception of contraction or expansion, so let's say pleasure and pain. And this is very important because it creates that link that is needed, and I think it's missing here. That is to say, every perception is a body, and not all, everybody is a movement at the same time. And the reality of the objects that we look around are levels of perception. It can be less and more refined. We have bodies inside bodies, and we know this from the anthroposophical doctrine. But still, all of this is needed for the argument to stay on its feet, and I think that it's not easy, because to deal with the whole problem of the body, then the necessity of a multiplicity of bodies, because to represent with a theory the kind of interactions and participations we seem to have, we know we have with others, that can be humans or animals or plants or things. All this deals with very different kinds of movements that can be just instinctual or thought or mechanical, and all of the exploration of these issues is big, and I think it's needed, as I said, for the argument to stand. So and I think that I read something by Steiner in which he admitted that the problem with the philosophy of freedom is that he had not the time to really create something that was philosophically bulletproof, and that it was impossible to do for him for practical reasons, but that I think he referred to the kind of problems that I've seen. In another discussion, I asked the problem of how can we define a concept? Where does the concept end? We have to deal with the threshold. Well, this threshold is the same thing as the body, as the skin I was talking about before. The idea or concept is itself something that has to reach the point where you can say this is a whole, and that is a kind of body, not just physical bodies, as I said, body in the greatest expansion. It's exactly what we find in anthroposophy, but of course it takes like 100 books to deal with that, and well here it's like it's hidden, the fact that something is missing. That's my That's my opinion. It's something I have been thinking through, and now that the book is almost over, as I can say, and I would like to also to link it with the work of Wilhelm Reich, because I think that what Reich did in his work I think he says the armor, but we could say that the skin, which is always crossed by these currents of pleasure and pain, which are perception and go together with the making of the whole that is distinguished from the surroundings by this skin and kind of separation, is exactly what the book lacks and could have been added to make the whole stand on its feet. This is my opinion. Thanks.
Thanks, Lorenzo. I hear you. And there's this, the problem is when you're dealing with an all-encompassing philosophy, in some sense, you, in a way, need to know everything before you can know anything. But Steiner had to start somewhere. And I think he wrote this book to speak to people in their ordinary consciousness. And obviously, because he wasn't bringing in the etheric, there are times, and I expressed this frustration earlier in earlier chapters, where he seems to not distinguish between organisms and machines, say, even though he would do that, and with the tool of not just the concept, but the reality of an etheric dimension. It's very clear what the difference is between a machine and an organism, at least until we have the etheric technology invented. But so he set himself the challenge of drawing people from their ordinary everyday consciousness. At the time he wrote this, in the late 19th century, I think it's still just as relevant today, because ordinary consciousness remains basically naively realist, and intellectuals may develop transcendental idealism or transcendental realism. And so he's still speaking to the same audience today, and trying to guide them to this experience of intuitive thinking and thereby freedom. And from there into the sense of these other bodies that could then shed more light on all the claims that science is making about the nature of nature and of the human being. Go ahead.
But maybe just a definition of what a body was could have helped. That I think. But of course, this is maybe using Steiner against Steiner, because I read what he wrote later, so some things are a bit obvious to us.
What do you think, Ashton?
Well, I was reminded of the moment, I can't remember which chapter it is, but when Steiner was talking about the plant, and so as soon as, well, we only ever get to know, different moments of the plant's becoming, and of course we can get to know, archetypal plant by observing all kinds of different cases of the plant, but when the plant is severed and is no longer a living plant, but just like a rose in a glass, then we don't have, then the body is sort of, it's just a vestige of a body. But even that body of the plant, itself is, when we're just sort of isolating it, is only a kind of provisional or partial picture of this whole cosmic coordination. And so it seems like that the delineation of bodies would only ever be a kind of provisional or partial activity that we would always have to engage in, in the moment. And of course, we can create generalizations that are sort of native to a certain time and place. And time could include long stretches of time. So as far as different kinds of species, but species are always changing as well. But I thought that what you brought, Lorenzo, in relation to Reich, it sounded like that what I guess the way that he was conceptualizing bodies has a lot to do with this polarity that you were describing. And so I think that again kind of points to the dynamic character of bodies and how there's this moment in the consequences of monism that I think is relevant here, and just kind of pointing to like, I guess the complexity, and Steiner kind of speaks to this, when he's, in his more anthroposophical register, when he's like, this, when he talks even about like, I guess clairvoyant perception is always it's like a kind of living activity, and you always have to kind of enter back into it in order to represent it accurately. It can't it would be, I guess, a lie to, or a misrepresentation without doing that. But anyway, this moment on 210 and the consequences of monism, at least in my book, 210, I think is relevant. He says, we cannot argue out the essence of reality by means of abstract conceptual hypotheses through pure conceptual reflection. And I feel like this kind of relates to the question of what a body is. But insofar as we find the ideas that belong to the percepts, we are living in the reality. And so I think, again, that kind of points to I think it is important, like you said, to have some kind of conceptual, very general understanding or description of bodies. But if we are to really know them, we'll have to be really, living, I guess, in a kind of participatory knowing. Those are just some thoughts.
Thanks, Ashton. Angus, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for challenging us, Lorenzo. Not agreeing is healthy. It's really healthy that people disagree, and I'm going to disagree with you. A couple of thoughts come to mind. I think for me, this book was never an intent to convey knowledge. It was an intent to convey a method of knowing, a method of cognition. And he says right at the beginning, this book has two questions basically. Can we understand? First, can we understand human nature in such a way that this understanding serves as a basis for everything else we may meet in the way of experience or science? And then the other bit was about are we free beings? So he never had that intention of doing so. However, there's I know in the book we've talked about perhaps the next book might be Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, and one of the things that Sergei Prokofiev did is he basically mapped how this is the same method of cognition that's used in the philosophy of freedom as in How to Know Higher Worlds. So that would make it extra interesting to perhaps see this crossover between the two. And I've read the book by Prokofiev, and he certainly makes a convincing case, if I can express it like that. So how we know the world is my interpretation of the central what Steiner wanted to convey in this book. I just did a quick check on this final consequences of monism, and it appears that actually those two, the final consequences of monism actually became the first. They were developed further in the first two chapters of The World Conception of Goethe and What is Life. I haven't been able to find much more, but it certainly appears to me to be, absolutely, it was there right from the beginning, but then he really fleshes it out in the World Conception of Goethe. I'm wondering if there was something else I wanted to say, knowing the world. I think actually the other thing that I was struck by and Matt also mentioned this in his presentation about Hartmann not being convinced, and this brought sadness to Steiner. And I'm hearing Lorenzo not being convinced here as well. I would like to at least sort of like posit the idea that convincing is, I wonder the extent to which Steiner was intent on convincing people rather than just laying the table and saying, I'm going to use it so varsågod. As like, hey, have some, like take it if you want it. Okay, I'm not trying to convince you or anybody. I've seen this. It's on the table. I offer it with love. If it makes sense to you, use it. If you don't, and so I felt there's a part of, there's an inner voice that sort of like reacted somewhat towards this convincing. I'm not sure it's people can argue against me as well, but I'm not so sure that Steiner was intent on doing that, but I'd happily be proven wrong on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some urgency to what Steiner is trying to convey, but it's clear that no argument will convince anyone. This is an experience one must have for themselves. He's just trying to create a nice, clear road sign that says this, that away. So, Jeff, go ahead.
Hello. I guess at least a couple of things, but I want to partially start to respond to Lorenzo, and then also where Angus was taking that. First of all, Lorenzo, there's a very powerful idea you're laying out, the connection between Reich's closed organomes and Steiner's missing concept of bodies and all this. It'd certainly be in computer terms, be a module we can plug into Steiner. But as I said, I'd like to think a lot more about that and talk at another time. But the other side of all that too is I guess I also agree with Angus as one of the real core points of philosophy of freedom, as we've said in so many ways, even today, is not to convince anyone, not to contain all the knowledge or whatever, but to really present a method, a scientific method for people to, that we can kind of use for so many things. Like, and I think of philosophy of freedom this way, that it is this scientific method, and look what happens when we plug it into this field, and look what happens when we plug it in here. It's like, it's truly a grand Swiss Army knife in that sense. Now, given all of that, that's just sort of setting the table for where I'm at right now. What I want to say is, we're at the end of this book, and was it Angus or someone else just before said about, well, we could just go back and start again at chapter 1. It's like, well, I'd be game for that. It's like, why do we need any other books? Truly, right? And part of me is sad, and boohoo, we're leaving summer camp now, but it's more seriously though, this, like, I've read this book any number of times over the years, and I guess my own understanding of the book, my own development, has kind of followed the structure of the book. And in this case, what I mean by structure is, the immediate presentation is in this language of the German idealists and the history of Western philosophy, and the standard questions of freedom, and all these kinds of things any philosophy student would tackle. And this book has been very difficult for me over the years, because I had to bring a lot of horsepower to really figure out even some of the basic things about Kant and all the German idealists and whatever, just so I can speak the language that Steiner was speaking and try to understand the book. So that, as I said, that took me a lot of horsepower. I got a lot out of that, but this reading, as we've done as a group now, I've finally come to almost like the hidden core of the book, the real message, which is, you know, the exceptional state, and you know, having this experience of our spirit being, and you know, the reality of that, and you know, and where our moral imagination, our creativity, where all these things actually come from. As you know, Steiner wanted for us to not to convince anyone, but for us to have that as our own living experience. Right. That's, as I say, I've kind of followed that structure from that outer, you know, philosophical language form, and you like it's like doing like a, you know, complex crossword puzzle or whatever, trying to get all the concepts lined up properly. But yeah, work my way all the way down into this, and and even, you know what, and even the fact that we read Riddles of Philosophy prior, I'd never read that book before, and that especially its last chapter really sets up this book quite well, like, you know, to make us ready for what the real point of the book is, as I just said, you know, that reincarnating spirit being. Now, I think, yeah, anyway, that's really my main point, is that I've kind of followed my own development in coming to understand this book, to finally come to this central point of, yeah, you know, experiencing and knowing, you know, that exceptional state, thinking spirit being, who does all these wonderful things that he lays out in this book. So that's about what I'll say for now. But Lorenzo, I will come back someday and talk more about the closed organome of Reich and all that. And yeah, there's a very powerful idea in there.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. The order of operations here, reading philosophy, Riddles of Philosophy first, and then Philosophy of Freedom, was somewhat serendipitous, but it definitely did, as we started going through riddles, become clear that that was a very happy accident. So we can go over for a few minutes. I definitely want to hear from both Chad and Kate, and Lorenzo wants to add something. So go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Matt. I thought that was a really excellent summation. And it seems like what Steiner is doing here is, you know, he's maybe not laying out a convincing proof argument, because maybe on some level, reality or the truth is a process. It's not something that can be ultimately realized through one particular worldview or one person, that it's something we come to together in a process relational thing. And I think it goes right back to like left hemisphere, right hemisphere. Like we're kind of stuck in this paradox. We're trying to overcome this paradoxical nature that the percept and the concept, or like of the particle and wave, or the body, like you're saying, Lorenzo, like, are we trying to define it? But at the same time, the body or an organism is a process itself in a relational continuum. And there's kind of no way to really define it in any ultimate sense. So we're in I think what Steiner has done in an excellent way is kind of overcoming the subject-object division or the materialistic worldview and this part of the evolution of consciousness, and recognizing that the world is divine, that it's sacred, that yes, we are realizing ourselves as divine beings, but as a part of a sacred world. And yeah, he's given us these tools to realize how we are in this paradoxical situation where we have to perceive, and then we have to align it with this concept. And in that, we can potentially overcome what seems to be a paradoxical core of reality. And so I'm really thankful for his effort to do that. And I understand why, on some level, it can't be complete. So leaving it open-ended in a sense of allowing for the mystery of the nature of the unfoldment of reality to continuously to emerge within us, and our mutual dialogues in assessing what is true, which is an ongoing process. So yeah, I really appreciate what he's done here, and I understand on the same level why it has a limitation to it. And the last thing I'll say is, so much of what Steiner's capacity, and like I was mentioning in the reading, the analysis of his birth chart, is that Mercury-Neptune conjunction, because like it is his capacity to think mythically, to think imaginally, to think in images, and that the mind is connected to spirit all the time. and it's a spiritual activity in doing so. But that, in a sense, is a gift to him because he has the Mercury-Neptune alignment. But that ultimately all of us, even if we don't have Mercury-Neptune in our natal charts, we're still have Neptune is there all the time, in the sense the archetypal is there beneath all phenomenal reality. And we have this capacity to do the percept and concept and bring them together to overcome what seems to be a division. So anyway, thanks everyone. It was a really excellent reading group the entire time discussion. I'm really thankful for everyone's positions.
Yeah. Thanks, Chad. I think just to briefly add, what you're bringing up just makes clear to me. This is obvious, but this is a percept. It's full of percepts, right? That we each have to bring our own concepts to in order to understand. And just as Steiner was saying, if we don't generate our own moral imaginations, we'll be led by the moral imaginations of others. He's not asking us to follow him and to adopt his moral imaginations, right? So of course the book is incomplete. Completion can only be brought uniquely by each one of us. Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
No, I don't think I'm going to say anything. I think that's a great way to put what I wanted to say. So, yeah.
Are you sure? I'd love to hear your way. I don't
know.
Not trying to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about how this whole time I've been reading the philosophy of freedom to try and get proof of the spiritual world. But the more I read it, the more it's directed me to the real world that exists, that I experience, and to find meaning and action in that world that I'm already in, instead of finding another one. And I've finished it with this belief that that if I, like, my actions and I'm gonna cry. My actions, if they come out of the unitary world, they will be spiritual. And the thing that I love about anthroposophy is that it, like, fans out from a unitary world conception into all of these different extrapolations into education and science, economics, psychology, religion, but they all come out of a unitary whole world. And that's so satisfying, because you can just learn the one world, and then you have the tools for sense making of every other extrapolation. And and something about, I didn't want to end because I liked what you said, and now I'm all lost, but I've really enjoyed this. And I just had a mouse running through my pantry, and it's just sort of that thing, like, you need to be in the real world, because the real world is the spiritual world. This, like, I have to deal with this mouse soon. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, Kate. I can relate to what you're saying. This hunger for spiritual reality, to commune with spiritual beings, and to feel that the world, the everyday world, is that it somehow pales in comparison to this other world that we just hunger to experience. And what Steiner seems to be saying is, no, it's the spiritual beings, it's us. And there are other beings, but first and foremost, like, it's us.
And I think actually what I wanted to say was that I was reading about something about the youth anthroposophical group, and how he's characterized their need as something like, they want anthroposophy to be every day, not just something on Sundays, not just, something that you take and contemplate. And the flip side of that is this advice that Steiner gives, that you have to live in your real world, and every step towards anything supersensory has to be accompanied by multiple steps towards the good. You can only move towards the good in the world you're not, in the world I already have.
Yeah. This is part of what I was trying to depict in my drawing, that this is a circular process, like starts with perceptions in the physical world and goes through this amazing process, spiritual process, but it's to come back into the physical world through our deeds to transform that world. Yeah. This is an escapism. There's nowhere else to go. All right. Well, that's it. That's the end of Philosophy of Freedom until we read it again. So thank you all so much for your contributions, your attention, your consciousness, the love, the warmth and light that you brought to this study. It's been really wonderful. I can't wait to read it again. I think How to Know Higher Worlds is what we all thought would be a good text to turn to next. So Ashton and I will be in touch over email about that. And we'll take a few weeks off though. Anything, did you want to add anything, Ashton? No.
I just want to say thank you to you guys, to Matt and Ashton, for inspiring us to do this and taking us along in this process and leading us in such amazing ways. Careful attention to everyone's perspective.
Definitely. I want to
Really helps,
second
guys.
what Chad said.
Yeah. Amen.
I think that's on behalf of all of us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
So much, guys.
And for introducing us to each other, man. Like this is a community, and I appreciate every single one of you.
Yeah, and we're not done communing yet, so don't go anywhere. All right, everyone, we'll be in touch.
See you soon, guys.